Good evening. My name is Sylvia Schwaag Serger. I'm a professor and newly elected president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences, and I'm very grateful to welcome you to this seminar today. I have a few basic things that I have to mention. The first one is that in case of a fire alarm will sound, and there are 3 emergency exits in this room, 2 in the back corners and 1 on the left. And if you would like to ask a question, we have a tight schedule, but we're very much hoping to get questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we can't get questions online, but at least in the room. Then please use the microphone at the side of your chair so that also the people watching online can hear you. And press the button, and please be brief. And as I said, the conference is also being streamed and recorded and will be available afterwards on the IVA website. So I would also express a warm welcome to the people who are joining us online. So with those introductory words, I would like to say the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Sciences. Our mission is to promote a sustainable and competitive society. And in doing that, we tackle complex societal issues that require broad perspectives and dialogue to find a viable way forward. We're particularly happy to host this event today because IVA is, to my knowledge, the oldest engineering academy in the world. It was founded in 1919. And we were actually already sending fellows abroad in 1924. So our first international fellow sent out by the Academy was, if I remember correctly, sent to the US. And these fellows that were sent out originally eventually sort of were the precursors to the technical attachés that Sweden still sends out today. So IVA has a very long tradition, not only of trying to promote technology at the service of humanity or to serve mankind, but also to do this across borders. And the reason IVA started sending out fellows so early was the realization that when it comes to technology and engineering, there is a great and continuous need to be in touch with the best in the world and to learn from each other. We are also extremely happy that we can gather fellows of IVA from 4 different continents today to share their perspectives on this topic, which is international collaboration in an age of geopolitics. I'm rephrasing the title a little bit, but across borders in an age of perhaps a changing geopolitical landscape. And we will have 2 short keynote presentations. I will try to be very strict on the timekeeping because we have a lot of distinguished speakers and we would also like to have input from you. And I will introduce the first keynote speaker shortly. I would also just like to say this is my final opening where this topic is very close to my heart. It's one of my research fields that I've been working on for the past 6 years. I have a project entitled exactly that, the global enterprise of science in an age of geopolitics. So I think this is a topic that is rapidly gaining in urgency and importance, and so we're hoping that we will advance the discussion today with this seminar. So with this, I just need to find my notes. I would like to then introduce the first keynote speaker, Dr. Byung-il Choi, IVA Fellow and President Emeritus of Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies. Professor Choi is an active commentator in South Korea on economics and international affairs. His writing displays a keen eye for the present development of national competitiveness and technological dominance on the one hand, and international cooperation and friendly dependence on the other. Dr. Choi is a respected voice in the Korean debate on economic security and technological development and is the founding dean of the Graduate School of International Studies at Ewha Women's University. He holds a PhD in economics from Yale University and was the Korean chief negotiator for the WTO basic telecom negotiations. His service in the international area awarded him 2 medals of excellence from the Korean government. With this, I would like to welcome Dr. Choi to give his opening statements. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's my honor and pleasure to be very first speaker at this century-old prestigious academic institutions. As Sylvia mentioned, I should admit I may be very lonely economist in the group of prestigious engineers and scientists. And the story I'm going to share with you in remaining of my time is how we can maintaining, securing, and enhancing tech sovereignty in this brave new world, which I call it new normal. Well, dating back to early days of my career, my first visit to Sweden was June 1993. Back then, the whole world was in excitement of witnessing next big thing. We are talking about communication revolutions. Internet was about to emerge, and everyone thought we could communicate anyone, anywhere. So during those days, I was working for the government, and we decided to learn from Swedish experience. So I came to this country to learn from Ericsson's experience. So they talk about 3G, and they were showing a story where you have friends in travel to South Africa. You could communicate with him by sending small picture you sent. So that is, think about it, 31 years ago. And those days, there was a sort of global division of knowledge and innovations, represented at the right top in Bay Area. So there was making something never seen in this world, so from 0 to 1. But when it comes to make a fast commoditization, assembly, and then East was ready to absorb those technology. So those were big days, great days. And in a sense, there was a great division of labors. But I think those days are increasingly becoming a thing of past. That is one of main background why we are making campus today. So as epitomized by factory in China in past 20, 30 some years, China has become voluntarily the assembly line for the global market. And to make it working, the neighboring country, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, they're ready to supply necessary finance, also management know-how. Also, the US and European Union are ready to supply all those necessary finance. But when it comes to the other side of the occasion, who will be the market? None of those would become the market. So they rely on European Union and US. But those three divisional labor is coming to shambles these days because initial anticipations had by Westerners, if China is going to join multilateral organization, they will, with their own speed, to converge to universal standard, something that more relaxed political system with universal appreciation of liberty and human rights. And so there was great anticipations. And Korea turned out to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of hyper-globalization, which experienced right after and the Cold War until 2016 US president elections. Korea was able to learn from West experience, so we were able to borrow playbook, and also we were able to not to make mistake, so there was great learning experience. And so Korea was a great example of catching up. And so as a result, Korea is enjoying the biggest manufacturing powerhouse among OECD economies. And to make it happen, all this global division labor was working in tandem. And not even to mention, among all those countries in the world, Korea's obsession with research and development, pouring in tons and tons of money, is pushing Korea from emulating emerging country to a forefront of technology frontier. But being a small and medium-sized open economy, to rely on those global divisional labors, that has been great, the wind from the behind, but all of a sudden we are experiencing headwind, so that is challenging today. But the sort of amazing trinity the world has witnessed was trade was promoting peace. There was a common belief, and so you could trade anyone regardless of that's coming from different political system. In this process, technology, which I mentioned, information technology was playing a role of great facilitators, great equalizer. As a result, we are able to create, maintain rule-based multilateral institutions. But all of a sudden, headwinds are emerging. And China unveiled its ambition, bold ambition, to challenge the West in terms of power and also in terms of territorial expansions. And they took out the old formula of utilizing industrial policy that is named as Made in China 2025. It was a very bold political statement. That was even, they're made in 2015. They were saying to the global community, within 10 years, we're going to increase market share of key 10 technology from single digit to 70%. As an economist, I knew from the beginning it is impossible without they have some secret formula. Turned out to be their secret formula. And then that provoked very, very aggressive reaction from US. So it was the former President Trump who decided to challenge this. And then amazingly, the next president from different political spectrum, Biden, continued to push China using terminology like, the high fence, small yard. So they are targeting on some key technology like semiconductor, electric vehicle batteries, and rare earth materials, and some pharmaceutical factory. So as a result, we are witnessing in northeastern part of this world, so-called new security line, which is dividing from the north to the south, which is connecting South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. So that is considered to be providing silicon shield against autocracy. Well, the problem is, this is very early development. People start to challenge the wisdom of this. Can it continue? Is it sustainable? Well, we'll see what it happens. And all eyes are on the US. Within a few days, they will decide who will be next president. But one thing I can tell you is, no matter who becomes president, between Harris and Trump, it is quite obvious. Based on prevailing sentiment among Americans, as you see, by ratio of 80 to 16, they are against China. So under this background, it is very difficult to make attempt to going back to old days. So China is rapidly responding to situations. That is their investment in Silicon Valley, mainly, and also their way of attracting talent and securing networks and brand, mainly relying on acquisition, was skyrocketed around 2015, 2016, but right after this, beginning to drop. And Korea is also responding a bit slowly, but as you can see, China was Korea's largest destination of trade, but as you can see, it is now about to be overtaken by US. So countries are making adjustment. But as Sylvia mentioned, my European friends are relatively slow to awaken these new realities. So what I'm saying is, to summarize what I said is, we are experiencing in our lifespan two different worlds. Old normal, which is explained. But new normal is start to emerge, but not entire activity of what you are doing, but in key sectors like semiconductor is a main tower. So as a result, rule-based multilateral institution is not working, and we are witnessing power-based illiberal attempt to making positions. So sometimes going it alone, sometimes try to make bilateral arrangement, but we haven't yet to see what is going to be newly emerging institutions. So there is a huge competition going on. So in the process, what is happening is, all the days, mantra was trade is believed to promote peace, but these days, deepening economic relationship turn out to be sometimes, the toxic. So they try to weaponize trade. And also all the wisdom of going for efficiency and just-in-time system, global value chain, is slowly replaced by reshoring. So they talk about just in case, and also they talk about resilience, control has become more important. So as a result, all days, there was a firewall between trade and security. So that means you could trade with whatever political regime they're coming from. But these days, we are increasingly witnessing trade is having access to security. So we're talking about securitization of trade. So new policy toolkit, which is going to be discussed among our prestigious panel, is two things: new industrial policy and export control. So that has increasingly become toy box. And I like to mention China is also, recklessly pursuing acquire global talent, and that was recognized by my friends from US. So in Stanford University 2019, if my memory is correct, they come with this, the working paper giving all alarm bell. China is aggressively pursuing their talent acquisitions. As a result, we have seen what happened to very famous scientists in Harvard University. And the case of Korea, because Korea put a lot of investment in China, take advantage of global value chain, especially semiconductor factory in China. Now it turned out to be Trojan horse. So we are experiencing this sort of stealing of precious intellectual property right, and so it has become an issue. So no matter how you develop your technology and secret formula, but somehow it is going to be stolen by someone. So we need to be very, very cautious. So as a result, instead of those very stable and working trinity, because of emerging great power competition, now technology is playing a role of disrupt. Well, my view of technology can be fluid, and it is two things. It could play a role of equalizer, it could play a role of disruptor. So these days, we're talking about disrupt like quantums, AIs, and bios, so that can be game changers. As a result, we don't have any stable global institutions you can rely on. So the jury is out there, and we want to create something very, very effective and durable. So I'd like to conclude by sharing what sort of challenge if we are domestic policymakers, domestic businessmen, domestic lead of think tank. First of all, with the keen eye of securing tech sovereignty, you need to build very effective tech innovation ecosystem, which is linking government, public sectors, and private business sectors and academia think tank. So they have to work as team and sharing information and also sharing difficulties and also all those. Especially in R&D, or in terms of empowering talent, that is very important. But the problem is how you can deal with domestic politics. Because in Europe, I understand you have the severe discussion how you can deal with issue of energy transitions and also immigration issues. And also US is going through the similar discussions. And the case of Korea and Japan and China, demography is a huge thing, how we can effectively deal with. Can he run from other countries' case? Also external shocks. We are witnessing two major wars going on these days. So those stand in the way of how we can effectively rebuild effective tech innovation ecosystem. So how we can effectively navigate new normal? Well, I'm not saying you have to redraw your game plan in all area economic activity. We are talking about few very key sectors which can asymmetrically change the game. So it has earned the jargon called critical emerging technology. And candidate for CET is chips, batteries, and bios, AI, quantum. And the policy option, as I mentioned, you may go alone, but being a small and medium-sized economy like Sweden's or the Korea's, even Japan, going alone cannot be options. And then what about bilateral arrangement? So as a result, we are witnessing, a lot of bilateral arrangement, but very much a limited effect. So it is quite desirable if you can create coalition among value sharing like-minded. That is going to be some dream project. But as economists, we learn to discriminate, distinguish between what is possible and what is desirable. So challenge is what can you do is rushing to desirability zones. I think that is a challenge upon us. So I'd like to conclude by sharing this picture, and I'm asking you, where's place for Europe? This is a picture taken last year, summertime. So 3 political leaders from Korea, US, and Japan was meeting, and they were telling to the global community, we're going to strengthen our collaboration ranging from not only security, economy, but all the science and tech. I think, you can easily recognize missing piece in the puzzle. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Byung-il. I think you set the scene very well and identified so many topics we could already be discussing. And also thank you for sticking to the time. Our next speaker, Professor Nelson Torto, IVA Fellow and Senior Government Official of the Government of Botswana, former Executive Director of the African Academy of Sciences. Dr. Torto has an impressive background combining high-quality scientific research with leading positions and senior expert assignments in academia and the public sector in Botswana, but also in the wider African and international context. He also holds a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Lund and still has close links to Sweden. Among other things, he sits on the International Advisory Board of STINT, the Swedish Foundation for International Collaboration, Higher Education and Research, which I chaired the board of for many years. And we're very much looking forward, Nelson, to your comments. Please.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I also want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to be here today to discuss this topic. And I should admit that the last time I was in a room and there were many Swedes by number was when I was defending my thesis in Lund. So on that day, obviously, I was trembling a bit and shivering. I'm hoping that today it's going to be a controlled form of interaction. I should acknowledge my chairperson, Agneta, who is in the crowd, and I'm pleased that you could come to this session. And of course, at the time that I was defending my thesis, my supervisor was there monitoring my movements and everything else. She decided to come and do that, and she's holding the camera, my partner. As Sylvia has said, Africa is a very big continent. I would not want to pretend that I can be the person that can really give you a summary that would be comprehensive for your understanding. But I think my discussion is going to be based on my previous role. As said, I used to work Africa-wide in terms of guiding and directing issues of research. And I was working very closely with ministers of science. And then when I went back to Botswana after COVID, I was heading science in the ministry responsible for tertiary education and research. And I also headed another ministry that was dealing with communication, but also just dealing with science issues. But I think what is very clear is that in all aspects, really, the workings of governments in the continent, and the African continent, is more or less the same. But whatever the case, what I'm going to do here, I'm here as an IVA Fellow, so not as a rep of the government of Botswana. I should just put that disclaimer, given my role in the office of the president. But what is key is that what I want to do is that, I want to give you an inner perspective of how it feels like to be in the African continent and what is the situation there. And if you were to want to engage with scientists, with governments and everything else, what are the areas that you need to look out for, and what would that mean? So just for brevity, I thought I should really give you a true reflection of the size of the continent, so you understand why I'm scared to speak on behalf of the continent. So this is really Africa. You can pack everyone and everything here, and it fits, and there's still some space to do a lot of things. I think the size of China is significant for many different reasons. Because in the current state, I think China has found itself in this space in the continent. It has got a lot of influence in terms of construction, in terms of projects. So in a way, even though the map of China is there, I think it also reflects the activities that China is engaged in. So going all the way, from Japan, going up to China there, this is an English-dominated space, and you go to the central part of the continent where, there's a blend of French and English. We've got Angola on the left side of China there, where there's some bit of Portuguese. But going all the way up, it's English, and of course, to the top end, we've got some bit of French. I think what is very key about Africa is that by virtue of the language from the colonial system, it sort of presents Africans as different. The ones who speak English see themselves different from the ones that speak French. And that alone is already a primary differentiator in terms of how people engage. Mind you, there are other vernacular languages that are associated with the people in the countries. And also the other issue is that, mobility in the continent is not as fluid as it is in Europe, of course. I think that you should be aware of. My last trip to Algeria, I had to go to Dubai. I flew Emiratus from Joburg to Dubai, and then Dubai to Algiers. There's hardly any airline within the continent that flies directly there, even though Ethiopia really is the hub in terms of travel for Africa. So, that's how complex it is. My other trip, obviously, I had to fly to France and then go to Algeria. So it just shows that movement in the continent is not as fluid as one would want it to be. So
let us move on to our next questioner at the microphone over there, Mr. Welcome to America, Mr. Mandela. I'm Ken Edelman.
Let me just. Yeah, I've stopped it. So I wanted to show you this clip. This clip is very important. If you were to forget anything that I say, I just wanted you to remember this clip, because I think it's about the geopolitics, our interpretation, how we see each other, and all the issues that are associated with dealing with another person in a different place where diversity can begin to bring complications. And of course, if we are looking at collaborations, those are the things that we need to deal with for who we are and for what we see. So this is a clip when Mandela came out of prison. Of course, Mandela at the time, he was just coming out as a terrorist, and some people were still trying to prove that he's a terrorist, and some people knew that he was out there for a good reason. But clearly, the fact that one can make assumptions when they're meeting a fellow scientist, a fellow collaborator, that's where things can really go wrong in terms of how we are able to do the collaboration. So I'm hoping it's about 4 minutes, so it's not a long clip.
Let us move on to our next questioner at the microphone over there, Mr. Welcome to America, Mr. Mandela. I'm Ken Edelman. Those of us who share your struggle for human rights and against apartheid have been somewhat disappointed by the models of human rights that you have held up since being released from jail. You've met over the last 6 months 3 times with Yasser Arafat, who you have praised. You have told Gaddafi that you share the view and applaud him on his record of human rights and his drive for freedom and peace around the world. And you have praised Fidel Castro as a leader of human rights and said that Cuba was one of the countries that's head and shoulders above all other countries in human rights, despite the fact that documents of the United Nations and elsewhere show that Cuba is one of the worst. I was just wondering, are these your models of leaders of human rights? And if so, would you want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. That we can and we will never do. We have our own struggle which we are conducting. We are grateful to the world for supporting our struggle. But nevertheless, we are an independent organization with its own policy. And the attitude of every country towards, our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle. Yasser Arafat, Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro support our struggle to the hilt. There is no reason whatsoever why we should have any hesitation about hailing their commitment to human rights as they are being demanded in South Africa. Our attitude is based solely on the fact that they fully support the anti-apartheid struggle. They do not support it only in rhetoric. They are placing resources at our disposal for us to win the struggle. That is the position.
Good. So, yeah. So I just wanted to bring this to our attention in terms of perspectives. That sometimes when there has been collaborations in the continent, I think collaboration has been on the terms of the one who comes in. So you find that people fly in with ideas, and they want the ideas to be taken as for what they are, and that's how it has worked. But I think what is emerging now is that we've got an Africa where there's a voice. So even if you were to listen to some of the African presidents, I think Macky Sall was the last one when it was the UN meeting, where clearly you could sense some sense of independence. So some of us went to school where we read the books that said Livingstone discovered the Victoria Falls. But we know he did not. But we still learn that, you know. So it's the change that is taking place that now, in a way, you find that for collaborations, for partnerships to be there, I mean, there has to be a sense of equity. If it is that it's something that reflects the need for humankind, co-creation is key. You know, you bring in your ideas, and we look at what we have, and we can be able to see what best can we actually use in terms of how we can address the needs of the people through research. And obviously, open-mindedness, where clearly one feels that, my colleague on the other side can equally have as good idea as I can have. And through this, we can be able to sit down together and be able to come up with a proposal or a research that can begin to address aspects of interest. And of course, respect and diversity. So I just thought I should bring this, and from Mandela's perspective as well, you can begin to see that there was a misalignment in terms of what exactly is it on the ground, how can it be addressed, how is it of interest to me, and so forth and so forth. So I just wanted to show you this map. This is more or less in a classical type of situation that was existing within the continent for a very long time, where you found that the collaborations were taking place between North America and Europe mostly. And of course, this was based on the power of the universities and the power of the financial assistance that was coming in. And we know very much that research only benefits where it's conducted. And by virtue of everything heading towards the north, it means that the universities in the continent did not develop as quickly as they should have, because obviously the best brains were applying themselves in a different zone. And the other critical issue that concerns this is the fact that it means that you would not really have the critical capacity being built within the continent as much as you'd want, simply because the leaders of the research are going to be in the north. So this was an issue that was of concern. But of course, there are other small tracks that are there. And of course, there are other countries like Russia, Cuba, and so forth, that do give scholarships to African governments where, you go and train. I mean, I don't know how many doctors we train from Cuba. I think it's the same as well for South Africa. On an annual basis, they get scholarship. But that is not necessarily at a collaborative level, because, these are young people that go and learn at school, and they come back and they are applied within the different areas of work. This map just reflects the fact that there is research being conducted in the continent. Obviously, the quality varies from country to country, but I think the most important countries really are South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. And also, this is also because of the fact that they are the ones that have the classical universities. They have a reasonable infrastructure. And as far as Nigeria is concerned, it's a game of numbers, given that there are more than 200 and something million inhabitants. So what one sees is that it's quite active in the continent, but the issue is that to what extent is this activity reflective of the capacity that is within the continent? Is it activity that is driven from outside? And therefore, if you were to cut the umbilical cord, what would happen? So these are some of the considerations that now, as Africans, we reflect and try to see how else can we find ourselves building the capacity that can allow this continent to be self-sustaining. So in my previous position, when I was working for the African Academy of Sciences, we had a platform that we referred to as IESA, Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa. So this platform was very important in the sense that our role was to look out for partners, our role was to look out for funding. But this partnership and funding was clearly only for things that were of concern to the continent. So if it was a collaborative topic, it had to emerge from the continent where we're trying to address continental issues. So, the platform, our slogans, our motto, our themes were that we're Africa-focused, we're Africa-driven, and we're Africa-led. So all these projects were led by Africans. The principal researchers were Africans. And of course, the research questions were of African need and value. So the key was for us to be able to generate value for the African continent in addressing employment, in addressing issues of poverty, and also addressing issues of climate change. And of course, we know that Africa is clearly a victim in terms of variability of the impact of climate change. The impact is quite huge in the continent in terms of rainfall and lack of rain, et cetera, et cetera. And there are other issues that relate to health as well. I mean, there have been quite a lot of other sub-platforms that have come through. NABSA was a platform that was concerned with regards to natural products and analysis, and there was a network in the continent where people began to want to have the capacity to address natural products. After all, we have got so much flora and fauna in the continent, and we know that more than 70% of medicine comes from plants, and therefore this was really something that people felt, you know what, this has to be driven from within the continent rather than relying on efforts coming from outside. NUSESA was about instrumentation. CIANAC, that is what I founded that one. It was about analytical chemistry. ARUA it's a network of universities that are really focused on research. FARA, I think it was on agriculture. But these are just a few of the examples that are there. But clearly, there was a realization that we cannot have a situation where our capacity is driven from outside, and we cannot really drive the agenda in terms of what needs to be done. So this is one of the platforms that came out of IESA. This is an African platform where clearly you see that we had 14 funded institutions which are all hosted in Africa in terms of the focus of the research. And there were 71 partners in these institutions, of which 53 out of 71 institutions were from Africa. So now it's a different blend where now you can see this internal movement within the continent. And of course, in terms of the countries that are involved, you can see it was the French, English, and Ethiopia from the Horn of Africa, and Kenya as well. But by necessarily looking at this country, one cannot tell who the leaders were. Even you see that for South Africa, for instance, there are 4 entities that are coming from South Africa. But I know, like, for instance, Sante is headed by a guy from Kenya. So there's a blend of different African ethnicities. There's a blend in terms of citizenship. There's a blend in terms of the languages. So we begin to see an activity that is intense within the continent that is driven within. And this is very key. And this is why we came up with this platform, Developing Leadership, Training and Science in Africa. And this is now being hosted by the Science Foundation, which is based in Nairobi. So one of the things that we cannot avoid, Warren Buffett says you should ignore small noises. But for me, an African, if you sleep in your house and there's a mosquito, you'll be ignoring that small noise for your own peril. But the noise that you cannot ignore is the fact that the African population is going to be much, much more than it has ever been imagined. By the end of the century, almost half of the world's children may be African. You can see the population of Asia, that it's high, but it's not going to increase. If anything, it will decrease slightly. But you can see from the map here that this here really reflects the growth of the African population. So if it's about labor, concerning research, if it's about what, you cannot just ignore the fact that this is what we are going to end up with by 2100. So on that basis, clearly it means that as we think of collaboration, as we think of partnership, I think we probably need to think of Africa in a different way. Because probably our hands, our labor, our mental capacity is going to be coming from that zone. I thought I should just give that for your attention. So one of the things that I wanted to just bring up was that Currently, the level of enrollment at the universities is not as high as it should be. I mean, the percentages are quite low. For those who are in tertiary education, these are the percentages that reflect those who are at the university. But of course, if you look at countries like Nigeria, which are in there, even though for Mauritius it's higher, for Nigeria, obviously, it's much, much higher from a number perspective, given the population. But I think it would mean then that for the African continent, given that the level of enrollment now is not really at the world-class level, it would mean that there's a demand in terms of the infrastructure, the capacity, et cetera, for Africa to begin to actually bring the levels to world-class, but even to cater for the expansive population that we're anticipating. So this is a key thing that we might want to look at and begin to see how do we find ourselves in this space and how do we do it. And of course, if you look at it from a different angle, you think, there could be a lot of unemployment, there could be a lot of poverty, there could be a lot of this, there could be a lot of that. So there could be some negatives that will come from the increase in the population. But again, in this frame of collaboration, in this frame of partnership, I think these are the issues that one can want to consider. So, this is my last slide, but I'm going to sit on it for, how much time do I have? A little bit, okay. So the perspective is that as human beings, because of the fact that we have common goals and common objectives, I think there's a need for coordination for action. Because if we coordinate, if we sit down together, we can be able to see what are the issues that we really need to address. I borrowed that anti-fragility of academia versus society from Nassim Taleb. I think it is quite key to say that Africa still has got common basic problems. Everyone, I think, is suffering because of mental health, but antimicrobial resistance is an issue that is of concern. If you look at MNCH, mother to newborn child health, those are some of the key issues. And if you look at other issues concerning water and so forth and so forth, so it would mean that our focus is driven to ensure that we make sure that the solutions that come out of the efforts that are coming out of research are really going to be able to address the communities. And that is a very key thing as far as we are concerned in terms of driving ourselves to what are the topical areas that we address. And when it comes to culture and capacity, again, it's what I said before. You might find that, so there's a difference between a university in Africa and an African university. So you might find that due to the colonial past, some of the universities are not necessarily entirely supporting the agenda on the ground. Forget about the Times Higher Education ranking, because you find that someone can actually publish a paper, and then once it's gone, it means that they'll never be able to retrieve it because they can not even have access because the university doesn't have access to the publications. So clearly, we need to be in a space where we know that we can be able to have a redress. So even if seemingly you were looking for the rankings for an African university and you find that the rankings are not according to Times Higher Education, one should note that there's a relevance that could be in that, in the sense that they'll be addressing the local problems. And therefore, it doesn't necessarily tick the boxes for the Times Higher Education issues. VUCA consciousness, we live in a volatile world. I mean, AI now has come into the space. ICT is much stronger than it was before. I mean, this week we've been having, from a global perspective, we've been having a meeting in Russia, and we're also having a meeting in the US of the IMF and the World Bank. So these are things that are changing all the time, and they have to affect how we are going about things. Youth and number dividend, of course, I've already illustrated. Climate change and global thematics, it would mean that we will need to find thematics that have got relevance to society so that we can be able to find common ground. Intelligence and academia versus industry. Necessarily, intelligence people don't really brief academia on things that are going on, but we know that industry is much, much more ahead of academia. I mean, in Botswana, we've got Volvo, we've got Scania, we had Saab as well, we've got IKEA. So you've got all these different Swedish companies, and they're all over the place. But you might not necessarily have the collaborations that come from academia that are in the same space as one would expect. We've learned a lot from COVID in terms of how we can work together. We've been able to coordinate, and I feel that with the same spirit, with the same thematics, we can be able to drive the partnerships in a manner that society can benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelson. I think we've had two excellent perspectives that I personally don't think we hear enough of in our current discussions. I'm now very happy to ask the panel to join me, and I will introduce them. As you can see, if you could just come up and take some seats. So we have Lawrence Jones, IVA Fellow and Senior Vice President of Edison Electric Institute. We have Ödjerd Andersson, IVA Fellow and CEO of Zensact, and I think she will describe briefly Zensact when she speaks. We have Katarina Bjelke, Director General of the Swedish Research Council, and we have Robert Dijkgraaf, former Minister of Education, Culture and Sciences of the Netherlands. So we're very happy to welcome you, and we're very glad you could join us in this what's so far, I think, been a fascinating conversation. So I would like to start. I think we're going to take it in the order that we have on the screen, and I would like to start to ask each one of you to, in a very, in 3 to 5 minutes, maybe reflect on this topic, or tell us why this topic or how it is relevant to you and what you bring to the table. So, Lawrence, if you would like to start, please.
Thank you, Sylvia. Well, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending where you are. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I work with the Edison Electric Institute. We represent utilities around the world. We have about 70 members in 90 countries, and we have members in the U.S., mostly investor-owned utilities. So when I got the question or the topic for this conversation, collaboration across borders in a polarized world, so I decided to break it down into sort of three areas, and breaking it down by looking at each word separately. And the first word that came to my mind in the title here is collaboration, and the question is, how do we collaborate, and how has collaboration today changed compared to what it was before? The world is polarized, but yet and still the world is still interconnected. We're sitting here, and this event is being watched all over the world, so we are geographically perhaps disconnected, but we're informationally and also to some extent even emotionally connected. And what does that have to do with collaboration? Because the borders that we talk about, I view it as geographical borders that really have no real meaning in the world in which we live today. Nelson, in his last slide, he talked about COVID. COVID showed us that the interconnectedness of the world in which we live today means that we need to really imagine what we mean by borders. Because there are the physical borders, we can debate where they sit and why they sit where they sit. But I don't think the physical borders are actually constraining us today in terms of collaboration because of technology. You talk about whether it's battery storage, AI, all the things that we in the energy sector and electricity sector think about. We will not be able to do those things today if we didn't have, I call it, a globalist collaboration in terms of information flowing back and forth. I think the real challenge that comes to bear here, being in the US, looking at utilities around the world, one of the things I see is that we're struggling with understanding 3 key factors that I think we're missing here. The first factor is trust. We discussed that, Sylvia, when we had our first conversation. I have become obsessed with trust. And my obsession with trust is because it's increasingly clear that it is the foundation of everything we do. And so, I mean, even having this conversation now, we're assuming that, Sylvia, you trust me, I trust you, so I will say certain things because we've developed a level of trust. But the question is, why do I trust you? Or why do I not trust you? And so as we think about collaboration, the question is, how do we rebuild trust in a world where we need to think about the fact that I will not collaborate with someone I don't trust? Now, trust doesn't have to be cultural. It doesn't have to be geographical. Trust at the end of the day is a human element, and we have to ask ourselves, how do we rebuild trust? The second element, as I was thinking about this, listening to both Byung and Nelson, are we asking the right questions when it comes to collaboration? Or are we asking questions based on a mental model that is outdated? And the challenge we have today is when we think about the world in terms of what is the world, what are the questions we should be asking? And no better place to discuss it than here at IVA, in the sense of if you ask the wrong question, you will get the wrong answer. And from a public policy standpoint, which is something we spend a lot of time at EEI thinking about, is how do we get policymakers, both in science and technology, to begin to ask the right question? Now, by right question, I would emphasize, it means perhaps sometimes the hard and inconvenient question. And we're always afraid of that because hard questions require you to do a lot of time thinking, and it also moves you away from your comfort zone. And so what I hope we'll discuss today is, what are the questions we need to be asking about this whole topic of collaboration? And the last thing I will make comes to this point about borders. So for full disclosure, I was born in Liberia. I spent almost 1/3 of my life in Sweden. So there are those who know I'm almost Swedish in a sense. And now I live in the United States. And so I get the question all the time, what are you? Am I Liberian? Am I a Swede? Or am I an American? And my wife would tell you, I always joke and say, I can be any of the ones I want. I'm the only person I think in this room who can say I'm a proud Liberian, a proud Swede, and a proud American. Because these characterizations actually mean nothing in the context of my humanity. And when we think about collaboration, I gave you one simple thing to end with. During the World Cup a couple of years ago, when Sweden was playing, I think against, wasn't America, against another country, my 2 boys were dressed in Swedish attire. They were cheering for Sweden. And I looked at them and I said, that's very interesting because for them, the perception that he talked about is that Sweden doesn't have to be a geographical place. It doesn't have to be a place that's limited to how people look. It's a mindset. It's an acceptance of that to be a Swede, I don't have to look like a certain thing or behave like a certain way. I have to embrace it. And so to collaborate with another person, I have to see the humanity in that person, whether it's science, physics, technology. And once I see the humanity, collaboration becomes easier. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Lawrence, and I resonate with what you're saying because I always get that question too. What I am, but anyway, please go ahead.
Yes. So maybe starting from that. So I grew up with the kind of notion that the world was global because I have an American mother and a Swedish father. And they gave me a very unfortunate name in those circumstances. I think my mom was feeling integrated at some point. And I think I strongly kind of was taught that the world is the playing field. And then at that point, like when I was becoming an engineer in the early 90s, it really wasn't such a global world when it came to products and where things could go. And I stumbled into telecoms. And telecoms was horrible back then. You couldn't really travel across borders and communicate with people. And it was so obvious to us that it was such a good thing to actually globalize the products and make the services global, and it brought such great value. And I was super proud to be a part of that, and we felt like we were making such a difference. And now I think we unfortunately saw kind of the end of that cycle in telecoms. I've been in automotive now for 8 years, and automotive went through this great, or we're going through this great transformation where we are transforming into much more of software and AI, and that's kind of where I'm focused right now. And that also was a global thing. And then we started seeing those digital ecosystems kind of splitting apart, and now it's kind of escalating on a level that I would have never believed if somebody told me 5 years ago, where there are rules about where you can bring your data. You cannot bring it out of China. You cannot soon probably not bring it out of the US. A lot of other countries doing things like that. You cannot buy equipment and put it anywhere in the world. You cannot also, in accordance with the latest proposals, not even ship hardware components or software components. And basically, if you start with data, if you restrict data in a world that's going AI, which the world is, then the products end up being different. The products are not the code we write, the products are the data we're training them on. And right now, the world is on a trajectory where that is happening locally and kept locally. So that will mean, and I focus all my days on automotive safety. And basically, with a strong passion to use the data we collect to whatever happens in one place should never happen in another place. And the way things are going now, and I'm sorry for being a bit gloomy here, we are not going to be able to use data from one end of the world and train on that accident and prevent that accident in another part of the world. And if this goes on, that will mean that an accident that happened in Europe will not save a life in the US and vice versa. And I think that is quite bad. So I'm actually a very optimistic person, which you wouldn't believe after this intro. So I think there's also quite a lot of room, because I think we see this. And there's such benefits. And I think it's kind of similar to when we saw the limitations of telecoms in the 90s. I think we have a great opportunity to innovate ourselves out of this. I think we can create ways to federate learning, to do things that allows us to protect things we want to keep local, because there are good reasons why people want to do that, but still not restrict products to become local and actually much worse than they could be and much more expensive to develop. So there's an innovation space here right now, and I think we could make use of that in Sweden, actually. I think we could be quite good at this. And I also think there's a certain space, as there was in telecoms, to actually standardize some of this sharing, because we will have to share data across these borders, even if we don't fully trust each other. Maybe we can agree on ways to share data that will actually allow us to be much more global about how we develop products. So those are my kind of optimistic hopes in this changing world.
Thanks a lot, Urga, and I think a really excellent build on from also this notion of trust and how we can get over this hump, perhaps, that we're in right now. Katarina.
Yeah, so my name is Katarina Bjelke, and I'm the Director General of the Swedish Research Council then since a few years back, but I have a background in academia in different positions, starting as a researcher and then went up to leadership for different universities. And I would say that the whole of my career I worked a lot with internationalization, and for many, many years, I mean, the word was go out there, collaborate with everyone, and try to have as much interaction as you actually can with everyone. And as we heard today, there has been quite a change in that attitude. And first, maybe I should say something about this trust thing, because that is extremely important. Trust and awareness of each other is extremely important. But I think that what we are struggling with is the difference between trust between nations and trust between people, and that is not the same thing, and that really affects, I would say, the academic collaboration in deeply. Actually, it's really making a difficult world at the moment. Even though I agree that this challenge is also an opportunity, I would say. But if you look at the Swedish Research Council, then I think many of you here know that we facilitate internationalization in many different ways. First of all, of course, our primary role is to, of course, be a research funder. And as such, we are collaborating a lot. We fund Swedish researchers, but they can also collaborate all over the world with their money. So that is extremely important for us, of course. We also participate in international collaboration where our government has agreements with different countries, of course, and also in the EU program, of course. And one big issue right now is how to collaborate on the international research infrastructures, because there we really have international collaboration and have had for many years with all countries that today are called difficult countries, and that is an issue actually, because this restricts our possibilities to interact with these very good tools that the researchers need actually in different ways in their research. So we also engage, of course, in international policy, and there we have a task to also advise the government also on many aspects of research, but also on internationalization. And I would say that we follow the situation with great concern, I would say. because what is happening is that many governments would like to put restrictions actually on the research society in how on and with whom to collaborate. If you look around the world now, it's many countries actually have documents saying that you mustn't collaborate with this and this and this institution and this country, and that is of course not good for advancing research and innovation in the world. What is happening, as we heard, is that we get a regionalization. And if we look at EU at the moment, I think you all read or at least heard about the Draghi report and the regionalization concerning then research and innovation is a threat, I would say, in the sense also that the governments now in Europe decrease their innovation and research budgets. And that is a problem, really, because what will happen then is that EU is getting even in a worse state than they are today, actually. I was just at the conference in Helsinki, and all our neighbors, they are decreasing the research and innovation bills, actually. In Sweden, we are fortunate, and we should be glad about that. I think that there will be a large research bill, research and innovation bill this year. So I think I stop there right now, and
thanks a lot, Katarina. I also want to just remind you that after Robert's intervention, we'll open up the floor for questions. But again, please be brief. But there should be microphones in your seats. Thanks, Katarina, for also bringing in yet another perspective: the individual versus the country, and also perhaps you're starting to address the role of. Can academia handle this issue by itself? Should it handle it by itself? And why or why not? And then, speaking of budget cuts, I think the Netherlands also knows a little bit about that. But please go ahead, Robert.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here. I'm Robert Dijkgraaf. I am a theoretical physicist. I was for 10 years the director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. Had Robert Oppenheimer's job. And then became in the service of government. And when I was announced I was a minister, there was a cartoon in the newspaper where you saw me descending from a little ivory tower into a big black hole that was called politics. Speaking as a scientist, of course, collaboration is absolutely key. Globalization works in science, if not only that, the things studying the nature of reality and the human mind and human behavior is truly a unifying force. I think also if you look at the global challenges that we are confronting, they are global, so they need global solutions. And also I think in terms of competitiveness and our economy, I think one thing we learn is that the true growth of productivity and competitiveness really lies in scaling up. So I think, particularly for smaller countries, achieving that scale is absolutely crucial. Let me say a few words also from the Dutch and perhaps also the EU perspective. And you mentioned already the Draghi report on the competitiveness of Europe, but perhaps more correctly, the lack of competitiveness of Europe. And I was talking to an economist, and he said, well, in Europe, too often, the total is less than the sum of the parts. Well, I think, there is a clear road how this collaboration should work, and I think it would have two components. One, gathering around a common strategy, so we need an alignment of research and innovation policies, and second, belief in distribution of labor. That is to say, also in terms of trust, that everybody contributes according to their own strength. Now, the word strategic autonomy is then often mentioned, and I want to make two remarks about that. First of all, there's only 100% of autonomy to distribute. So an autonomy at, say, the European, at the continental level means no autonomy or less autonomy on the national level, or less autonomy on the institutional level or even individual level. So the question is, I think, if you want to have collaboration, what is kind of the smart way to distribute autonomy? Where I think, even there's a certain risk And that's the second element, that we think too regional. And from the Dutch perspective, we always add open, so open strategic autonomy. And what I find attractiveness of the European model is that it can grow. For instance, if you look at the Horizon program, that has like-minded countries joining. And I think that's a very important element, that you in some sense have a collaborative model that might be a little bit have an inner circle and outer circles, and think of this in a kind of a smart way. And I think also it's very important that we only collaborate in terms of our innovation and our science, but also collaborate in terms of our policies. And I would say this is not the natural tendency. As a scientist, if I would think about something, the first thing I would do is what do other people around the world think. I say, as a minister, that's not the obvious reaction in a ministry to see it's what I call the N=1 phenomena. There's only one copy of your country, and you feel very unique, but you're not. And I think actually from a negative point of view, or one point where this actually comes to focus is this topic of research security, the fact that we're worried about how to collaborate. Where I think, as always, it's a trade-off. It's a risk to be paranoid, and there's a risk to be naive. And one thing I've seen is that this can only be solved by truly raising consciousness, around everybody in the research enterprise. I like to say, why can you safely travel with your car on the roads? Not because there's a policeman on every corner, because there are traffic rules, and you have your driver's license. And so I think one of the lessons I learned is you can only do this working with the community. The expertise that's necessary, for instance, to determine whether something is dual use or not, can only be, that's the paradoxal, can only be done, that expertise is only in the minds, in the labs of those who are the true experts. And here I think there's a beautiful metaphor that I heard talking to somebody who was actually in the defense industry, and she said it's the leaking bucket. She said, no, a bucket is always leaking. The point is, how fast do you fill the bucket? And I think this is, in any research and innovation intensive country, the big risk is really closing the faucet and then basically closing you off. And you want to be attractive, and for talent, for new ideas. And I think this is an incredibly important lesson, that if you think of the modern science and research and innovation enterprise, how did it came into being? And I think it's a very complicated story where all parts of the world contributed. But it's this funny combination of collaboration and competition that brought us here. And so I think we are now, on the one hand, in a wonderful stage where basically the whole world is online, and we have an opportunity to collaborate finally at the global scale. But we somehow are now not learning that lesson, or not incorporating that lesson. And so we have, I think, a certain risk here that we close off, so to say, in another metaphor, the oxygen that's necessary to have a vibrant society.
Thanks a lot. Excellent points. I think so much food for thought. I'm realizing that I think 90 minutes wasn't quite enough for this for this conversation. Are there questions or comments in the room? 1, 2, 3. I'll take those 3. And if you could be... Oh, was there a question here? No? Okay. I'll take those 3. And then if you could be brief, please go ahead, Agneta.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this seminar. It's some kind of wake-up call. And thank you, the contributor, talking about the new normal and the VUCA world. Well, there is a lot of danger around us, and we are observing it. And you in the panel has commented about this in a very good way, I would say. And how has the collaboration changed? It is changing a lot just now. And I'm a little afraid of that we just will collaborate with the like-minded. Because it's easier. And we have the secularization, as you mentioned. And we are just talking about that. So I am a bit pessimistic about internationalization for tomorrow, especially for the academy. And if we compare the industry, they are much more global. And the regionalization of internationalization, especially in the European Union, but also in other parts of the world, is very, very strong just now. So I just want to thank for this Wake Up seminar, because we have to think which way are we going forward in the next decennium.
I completely agree, Agneta. And for those of you who don't know, Agneta did a very important government investigation on this topic a few years ago. And you're, of course, completely right in your concern, because the bibliometric data shows that collaboration is declining between certain key countries and regions. And then the question becomes, how do you build trust when the interactions are declining? Go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. So Valentina Tartar from the Stockholm School of Economics. So there was another economist in the room, just to say, you know, you're not alone. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. My question is maybe what's your reflection about the role of mobility? And I don't want to pick on the Netherlands because you're here, right? But it's many other countries where we see, for example, restrictions in terms of intake of students to universities, or, you know, rules in terms of mobility, and how do you see actually this the impact, as all of you and me as well have actually benefited from a high level of mobility in the past.
Thanks a lot. Also interesting question of mobility ties into also a little bit what Nelson was talking about, because that's something we looked at a few years ago. The sort of took a long time for mobility within Africa also to increase. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for a great seminar. My name is Ulf Kruse. I run a business network with C-level people in large corporations. Just a comment is that Sweden is among the top 5 of innovative countries. However, we are absolutely crap in cooperation between companies and triple helix. We're in 27th place according to PVC. So I'm not sure that innovation goes hand in hand with cooperation. However, my question is, basically I think to Mr. Choi, we just learned that Africa is increasing rapidly when it comes to children. The flip side is that Japan is disappearing, so is South Korea. There is basically no children being born there. And there is a saying that in 100 years there will be no Japanese left to collaborate with. So how do you deal with that in the perspective of collaboration, where there will be no young scientists or industry leaders left?
Excellent questions. Thank you very much. And we should then give Byung-il and also Nelson a chance to respond at the end very briefly. But if I could ask you to pick whatever question or comment you would like to pick and also react to each other if you want. Do you want to start, Katarina?
Yeah, I just, the question on mobility, that's actually a sad thing, I would say, at least what we see at the Research Council. Mobility interest goes down. From the Swedish side, and also for people coming here. So somehow, I don't know if that's an effect of this, the global situation at the moment, but it goes down. So that's sad, and not good for science, of course.
Ödjad and then Rebia.
But maybe to comment on the question or the statement that we're not that good at collaborating, and I think you're right. You have facts to support it. I think one opportunity, because I've been gloomy enough now, is that in certain fields, like for instance the AI field, we see that a lot of research is actually moving from academia to a collaboration between companies and academia, and I think mainly fueled by the hugely expensive data centers you need to be able to run research. And we do a lot. I mean, in my small company, we're like 800 people. We run continuously doctorate programs with 10 doctorates going, hired by us, running on our equipment, but of course, working with open research together with academia. I think we see much more of that. And the cycle between research and being deployed in a product is down to weeks and months now. And when I was like in telecoms in the 90s, somebody was doing research. It took years before it ended up in a pre-development program, and then after that, a couple of years before it became a product. So I think there's a point in time now where we can actually tighten the collaboration in new format. And I think we're doing it, but we could be doing much more.
Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps direct to 2 points. So first about mobility. It's really interesting that I think, or not interesting, it's I think very threatening that mobility of researchers and students is certainly in Europe, but I think in other places too, is becoming entangled with the migration debate, which I think is very detrimental. But also, I think here you can't be totally naive. And I think like this year, for the first time, also in the Council of European Ministers, we discussed student mobility. And then I noticed that we need kind of mobility 2.0. We need a more thoughtful approach where we address countries who say, wait a moment, there's an enormous brain drain on our capacity. Or what we see, for instance, in the Netherlands, we are one of the favorite destinations, but Dutch students less and less travel abroad. So it's not in balance. So I think we need a more thoughtful discussion, but we clearly want to separate it from another, much more political, volatile subject. The not like-minded countries, I think, already that word like-minded sounds like very binary, right? You're with or not with us. I think, we need a much more subtle distinction on which topics we can collaborate with whom, etc. And I think there are important lessons to learn from the past, because it's not the first time that there are geopolitical tensions. And we have worked through that. And actually looking backwards, it's much more easy to look backwards and see that scientific collaboration was always, incredible, an incredible foresight, because it helped not only to help countries to become more like-minded, but also it really opened channels, I think, that were closed in many other ways. And I sometimes feel that we are making mistakes over and over again and are not learning the lessons that are truly there in the past.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I'm going to be optimistic.
Okay, please.
So look, 30 years ago when I was doing my PhD in Sweden at the Royal Institute of Technology, we were about 12 PhD students, of which maybe 50% were not from Sweden. And I would argue that collaboration is happening. I think the challenge we have is we need to reimagine what we mean by collaboration. And we need to also look at collaboration in terms of demographic and age. Because when I travel around the world, and I'm fortunate to do it because of the work I do at EEI, I tell you I see young people from different parts of the world collaborating in a different way, in a way that we don't understand if we use yesterday's mindset. And the challenge we have today, as I look at collaboration, I hear this discussion, and I agree with you, there's an issue of trust between nations and then trust between people. But if we think of social media, what it's doing today, there are a lot of issues around fake news and all of that stuff. But if you look at young people, they're collaborating in a way that we have to ask ourselves, what does collaboration look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years? I think the challenge we have, Sylvia, we're trying to collaborate like we did before. We're imagining our partnerships and our friendships like they were before. And if you look at when we were at KTH, even though we all came from different countries, we had shared vision, we had shared goals, which meant collaboration didn't really have to be as difficult as it is today. The other challenge we have, and I love what you said, Robert, in terms of the politicization of collaboration, because there is also a fear factor in terms of who you collaborate and who you don't collaborate with, right? And I believe that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, the real challenge we have is how do we get the younger generation to collaborate in a different way? People who are now Gen Zs or millennials or whatever the other nomenclature is, they view the world very differently. And they're going to be running the world 10, 15, 20 years from now. So we should be thinking about how will your grandchildren and great-grandchildren want to collaborate, because if you go back 50 years ago when the world was in turmoil, I'm sure there was no collaboration. But guess what? Scientific collaboration did happen. In the energy sector, electricity sector, I see Bo Nordmark here from Innova. You're seeing a lot of innovation happening. The challenge is the noise about collaboration dominates the progress, right? And so I believe, and I see it at EI when we travel around the world. Utilities, for example, they're talking. Now, you shouldn't be naive. There are things you need to be concerned about, but that doesn't mean that people are not talking. The real challenge is, how do we get the policymakers to stop demonizing research, to stop demonizing science, and being the bottleneck that's stopping progress from happening in terms of collaboration? Because if you keep saying there's no collaboration, people will be like, well, what do you mean there's no collaboration? I'm collaborating a lot if I'm a young person, but not the way you want them to collaborate. So I think that's the challenge we have, reimagining what we mean by collaboration. And the last point I will make, coming back, I love your point about trust between nations and trust between people. I'll put a little plug here. For the last 3 years, I've been doing some research on trust. I'm working on a book on how to rebuild trust in a broken world. And the reason why we're doing that book, a colleague of mine, is because we believe that trust is actually not as difficult as people think it is to build. The problem is, are we actually spending time in trying to build trust by looking at the other person as a fellow human being, as opposed to seeing you're of that nature or that country or that country. As a human being, people should start focusing on the humanity of people, which I think is missing in the conversation around collaboration.
Thanks a lot, Lawrence. I'd like to turn to Byung-il and Nelson. Would you like to, is there something you would like to reflect on?
Well, I appreciate your questions.
I think the microphone is not on. Maybe if you could, or will you try? Oh, now it's on. Try it again.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, great.
So I appreciate your questions. The case for Korea is, well, as economist, I always believe there's some certain optimal size of population for country. So, you know, we are facing certain demographic cliff. We expected within 30 years, you know, that we're going to lose almost like, 17 million people. Well, having said that, Korea is so far expecting it and adapting the situations. For instance, data showing, in terms of industrial robot deployment, Korea is #1 in the world. When you compare with other major manufacturers like Japan and Germany, ratio between Korea and there is a ratio of 3:1. So already in many industrial fields, robot is being utilized. But when it comes to question, where forefront research coming from, then I think we have national debate, how we can attract global talent, including Korean diasporas. So we have huge national debate, and it is not about education policy alone. It requires all this, the brainstorming and how we're going to change paradigm from Korea's, like Japan, mainly based on single ethnic citizen living in, to live how you can, as we continue to say, that collaborate with different minds. But responding to a discussion about collaboration, I think we need to pose question, collaboration for what? Okay, so I learned from my life, trust is not blind. We need to earn trust. And it is very difficult to build trust, but easy to destroy trust. So we are treading on that very scary zone.
I agree. Thank you. Nelson, would you like to?
Well, yeah,
I think it's coming on in a second, right?
Okay.
Hold on. Yeah, now it should be.
So my comment is non-African. I'm wearing my Swedish hat, and I'm just I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can learn from industry, as academia, for instance? Because it would seem that industry is able to penetrate in areas where probably academia doesn't go. And when we reflect on the issue of funding, that maybe research funding budget is lower in some other countries than it should be. And I'm just wondering, for a country like Sweden, where we can say Sweden is a small country, therefore the market is outside, how then would one be able to build their market if one doesn't go outside and understand the market which they are going to address? So is it not, I don't know, the dog and the tail and so forth. But the issue is, I think it's interesting to see how else could we be part of industry in a manner that we can begin to have the confidence that can allow us to penetrate in areas that seemingly are not friendly to go. Is it an issue of, for companies, they live to make money, and for academia there's an option? If you don't collaborate, you can still be doing other things? Or what is it?
Can I answer that question briefly?
Briefly, yes.
I'll be brief. So one of the beauties that Sweden has in terms of research, at least in the power sector, is that almost every PhD project is tied to the industry. And so you have a very close industry-academic collaboration that has gone on for decades. What that does is that it allows the academics to sort of ground their research to some practical reality, so to speak, right? So I think the question is, what do you mean by academia? Because there's pure science, which I guess struggles more with getting the connection with industry as opposed to applied science. I think applied research is much easier compared to pure science. And I think making that distinction is extremely important from an academic standpoint.
Thank you so much. Personally, I think, but I'm biased, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think it's extremely refreshing to get perspectives, not only from the usual suspects, from Europe or from the US or from maybe China, but also to hear. I thank all of you, because I think Nelson sort of brought a lot of issues home about what is the struggle, what are the problems, what is the perspective, and I also thought it was refreshing to hear your take on rankings. Byung-il, really interesting. I think Korea has been living for a much longer time than Europe, actually, with this balancing act between two superpowers, understanding the complexity of it. So I thought that was extremely helpful. The panel, we would be in denial if we weren't a bit gloomy today, I think. So, but I think the real achievement is to actually stay optimistic. And I think you've done that. You've helped us stay optimistic. You've brought up some really interesting questions about trust. I completely agree with you. I also agree with you, Lawrence, that maybe this new generation is collaborating differently. But if I look at all of us, at least 3 of us have earned degrees in countries that were not our own countries. And I think the insights you gain from that, in understanding other perspectives and also being able to engage in difficult conversations, this is the ability we're losing right now. I think the courage and the willingness to engage in difficult conversations with others. So I think these perspectives were extremely valuable. We touched upon the issue: what is the role of academia in building trust? Right? Or what is the role, and where does it perhaps, how does it need to adjust if we are now in a different area? And Robert, the thing about, I totally agree with this. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place if we again are the risk between being paranoid and the risk of being naive. You know, where do we end up there, and how can we advance and not just stay stuck in that? My final point would be, Europe, you know, where is Europe? I think that's what you started off with, Byung-il, and that's a really interesting philosophical question. One thing is that I had the privilege of being part of the high-level group that looked at the future of the European Framework Program for Research and Innovation, where we actually make a proposal for a nuanced and granular approach to international collaboration, which I'd love to discuss more. But one of the things is that Europe, the Framework Program, there are few countries that would not like to collaborate with Europe in the Framework Program. I think this is something we still have going for us, a very strong thing we have going for us, and that Europe, you know, by definition, is about cross-border collaboration. And I think that's something we should cling to, and that's something we should expand, not perhaps only to like-minded countries, but in an enlightened way beyond the borders of Europe. So with that, I would like to thank the audience online. I would very much like to thank our speakers for what I thought were excellent keynotes, as was the panel, with very insightful observations. I hope we've moved the needle a little bit towards a more enlightened view. And thank you for your optimism, because it's easy to be pessimistic today, but it's hard to be optimistic, so that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you.